Hello and welcome to the Whirly Bloke channel. Today I'll be reviewing this Arrow 3 6S racer from HGLRC. HGLRC do make some stunning quads, but in the past I found them to be a little bit patchy on reliability and support. But over the last year they've really got their act together. How do I know? Well, for the last year, one of my favourite 5-inch quads has been this Batman 220, which I take pretty much everywhere. And it's a bit like an Emax Hawk 5, but just so much better. It's faster, stiffer, a better tune, so it flies much nicer. Yes, that is possible. And it's been totally faultless. And HGLRC's SP has always been to use decent components. They're about 10% better than the competition. Okay, the quads cost 10% more, but it really is worth it. And quite why I've never got around to reviewing this Hawk 5 beta, I don't know. Well, maybe it's just because I'm too busy flying it. And now HGLRC have produced this 3-inch racer, and it's just like a shrunken Batman 220 and follows their same mantra of using top quality components. And all these components are branded forward, which is the HGLRC component branding, just like Diatone has the Mamba component brand. So let's take a closer look at this. This is the bind and fly version that comes with a genuine FrSky XM Plus, but you can get it with an FS A8S receiver if you're using FlySky. And there's also an option for no receiver if you want it. And as well as a choice of receiver, you can also order this as a 4S or a 6S. Yep, that's 6S on a 3-inch quad. And this affects which motors you get, which I'll talk about a bit later because this causes a little bit of confusion. But 6S on a 3-inch quad, it's a fantastic idea. So, this is a 152mm stretched X frame, and it's got separate arms which are bolted together in the usual sandwich that you'd find in 5-inch quads. The arms are 4mm carbon, which is very nicely finished, very thin arms, and the top and the bottom plates here are 2mm carbon. And there's also this reinforcing plate on the top here at the front. It doesn't really protect the camera, but it does give a bit of extra strength to the carbon top plate where the standoffs are. Now, the disadvantage of this sandwich arrangement is the extra weight, because you've got more carbon in here. But you've got the huge advantage that you've got replaceable arms if you break one. And it's mega stiff, which is just what you want for racing. And in here, we've got a 20 by 20mm flight stack, which is soft mounted on a combination of metal and plastic standoffs. And it's got the flight controller mounted on these silicon anti-vibration washers here. There's 3 of them. Looking at the stack, at the bottom here we've got the forward 45A all-in-one ESC board. This is based on the STM32F051 and can run on 4 or 6S. And the peak current is a massive 55 amps for 5 seconds. But you're only likely to hit this with a 4S lipo. And it's running BL Heli 32 and supports all the usual one-shot, D-shot protocols, even up to D-shot 1200. There's also ProShot 1000 if you plan going down that road. The PCB down under here is absolutely littered with ceramic capacitors to reduce noise. And there's this low ESR capacitor on the bottom here, which is 220 microfarads, and it's mounted directly onto the battery terminals. And I really like the way they thought about protecting this with a cutout in the bottom plate here, which is a nice touch. And this ESC board is beautifully laid out. It's just a work of art. Another nice touch is the way that they have soldered the motor wires facing inwards to keep them inside the stack. Now, I've seen loads of the top racers doing this to keep them out of the way so they're less likely to get damaged when you get hit by another quad and props clash. It's a good idea. The XT60 on the back here doesn't actually have any strain relief, but there's a couple of holes in the bottom plate here, so you could put a zip tie through to stop the PCB pads getting ripped off if the battery gets ejected. Next on the stack is the forward F4 mini flight controller, and this is a total beast of a spec, it really is. It's based on the STM32 F405 R6T6 processor, and it's got the MPU 6000 SPI gyro. Again, it can be powered directly from 4 or 6S, but this is all wired up internally, so you don't have to worry about that. And it's running Betaflight Omnibus F4 V6 target, currently flashed to version 3.5.5, which is a couple of minor points out of what's current at the moment. And of course it's got the Betaflight OSD, so you can change all your PIDs and so on in your goggles. And this has got 6 UARTs. Yep, 6 UARTs. 5 are pre-configured, which I'll show you later, and there's 1 spare. And it's got a 5 volt 3 amp BEC if you need some real power for LED strips or a race transponder. At the top here, just under there, is the VTX, and this is an HGLRC XJB TX20 V2. It's got 48 channels over 6 bands and is power switchable between PIT, 25, 100, 200 and 350 milliwatts. And it also supports smart audio using IRC tramp protocol. So again, you can adjust the frequency and the power settings with the OSD in your goggles, which is great. The SMA Pigtail on the back here is mounted on a 3D printed TPU bracket that also supports the RX antennas. They supply this with a really rather nice stubby. Let's have a look at it. It's an HGLRC branded hammer, and although it isn't marked, it is right hand circularly polarized because that's the only one they do, and it's an antenna with gain, 5 dBi. It's going to be interesting to see how that performs. The FPV camera is the Ratel from Caddx. Now, there's been a lot of chatter about this camera, which looks pretty interesting. It boasts an 8 millisecond latency, which I guess is why HGLRC chose it for a fast racer. Whether it really is 8 milliseconds, who knows, but it's supposed to be pretty good. And one of the really interesting features is the nighttime performance. So you can apparently fly in moonlight. I'm not going to do that now, but I will check that out when we get some decent summer nights. And squeezed in the top here is an FrSky XM Plus receiver. It's not a bad choice, but all the racers I know these days are using Crossfire. Not particularly for range, but for reliability. But it's an okay choice. Do remember though, if you're in the UK, this receiver will be flashed with the international version of the firmware, so it won't bind with your EU LBT transmitters. I'll be reflashing this with the LBT version for my radios, and you can check out this video up here to see how to do that. It's dead easy, to be honest. These motors are forward FD 1408s, and they will be a different rating depending on which quad you order. Now this is a 6S, so it's got the 2400 kV version, but if you buy 4S you'll get the 3600 kV motors. And they are mounted with just 3 bolts here, which is the same as the Batman and is pretty normal for a racer. And you'll also notice the kink in the arms here. This is exactly the same as the 220 Batman. Now the ratings of these motors does cause a bit of confusion. Surely the higher voltage version would have the higher rated kV motors. No, that's not how it works. kV is a measure of RPM of a motor per volt. It's sort of like the constant velocity or the optimum operating RPM of a motor, and nothing to do with kilovolts. So if you have a 2400 kV spec motor, it means it'll rotate at 2400 RPM when it's powered by 1 volt. So if you have a 6S lipo, it'll rotate at 2400 times 25, which is 25 volts, and that means the RPM of this is 6000 RPM. Remember, a 6S LiPo is 25 volts, 25.2. Now, motors are designed to run at an optimum or maximum frequency for best performance. For these motors, it's around 6,000 RPM. So if you power these 2400 kV motors off 16.8 volts or a 4S battery, you'll only get to 40,000 RPM. So you need the 3600 kV motors to achieve 60,000 RPM. So if it's running at the same RPM between 4S and 6S, what's the point of using 6S? Well, it's a little bit complicated, and I'll cover this in an upcoming beginner series that I've got planned. But for now, think of it as the motor needing less current to achieve the same performance than if you were using 4S. The advantage is you get longer flight times and the voltage won't drop off nearly so early or sag as much. And you could use a lower C-rated battery if you wanted, and that puts less stress on the batteries. The disadvantage is 6S batteries are bigger, heavier and cost loads more. And it's all a trade-off as usual. But racers and acro flyers these days tend to be using 5 and 6S as a norm, but it's not a cheap option. To be honest, I was mostly interested to see how a 3-inch flies on a 6S setup. Now this comes supplied with 3 pairs of Gemfan 3052 props, so you get a couple of spares. I never quite understand why quad manufacturers don't include more spares for ready to fly stuff. I mean, they cost practically nothing wholesale. Let's check out the weight. So it's just a tad under 170 grams, which isn't too bad. And I'll probably end up strapping a GoPro session onto here, so I may need to tweak the PIDs to cope with the extra weight. So let's take a quick look in Betaflight and see how HGLRC have configured this Arrow 3. Let's check that that is moving. That's good. Let's reset the Z-axis. Good. Forwards is forwards. Roll, roll. Yaw. All looks good to me. Quick calibration of the accelerometer, which is good. Look at the ports, and yes, here we are. We've got 6 UARTs. The top one here is the USB UART. Don't play with that, otherwise you'll end up not being able to talk to your quad. So we've got here, we've got UART 1 is set up as a smart port. UART 2 is setting the VTX, and that's for the OSD. UART 3 has been pre-configured to use GPS, so maybe at a later stage I'll add the uBlocks 8 chip on there. I'm not going to do that for now. UART 4 is configured to use the telemetry input from the ESCs, which means we can display various things in our goggles like temperature and RPM. UART 6 is set to serial RX, which is the port that we'll be using for S-Bus. Excellent. So configuration, we on D-Shot 1200, and the options are all the normal stuff, including ProShot 1000 if you fancy going down that road. It's not for me. And let's see. So I'll leave these loop frequencies and update frequencies to be the same. Generally I go for either 4K 4K or 8K 8K depending on the board, but I'll leave this as the factory setting. Maximum arm angle I've set to 180, and I've ticked RSSI. That just simply means that we'll be able to display the RSSI value in our goggles, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. Receiver's been pre-configured as S-Bus, serial, sorry, with S-Bus as the provider. And then things that are turned on are OSD, ESC sensors. That's been turned on because we've set up the ports to do that, and then we've got anti-gravity and dynamic filter. Air mode's off, which I just put that on one of the modes, which I'll show in a sec. Also, I've set RX Lost to be on. That's because we don't have a beeper, and in D-Shot, if you turn this on, it means that the ESCs and the motors will squeak at you when the transmitter's not talking to the receiver. Power and battery, I make my minimum cell voltage 3 and the warning 3.2, just so I don't get nagged too often when I'm doing punch outs and so on. Failsafe is set to drop, which is fine. PID tuning I have left completely as stock, and we'll see how we get on with that. because these are the factory settings. The only thing I've changed are the rates, and I've just set these to be what I like on a 5-inch. Whether these are correct for a 3-inch, who knows. But I did find on the Diatone R349 these rates still worked for me, and I like a lot of expo in the middle, which is good, but not too much. Nothing else to change there. Receiver, yeah, so because what I've turned on the RSSI, that will come in on, it's going to be on aux 12, so that will come in now. I haven't got my receiver turned on at the moment, but it simply means that we can put the RSSI output on our OSD and our goggles, so we'll just save that. Modes, all simple, arm switch, angle horizon, which I hardly use, and then when they're both off it puts it in acro mode, and air mode is on, which is fine for me. Beeper I've set up, but we don't have one, may fit one later. And flip over after crash, turtle mode. Good, nothing else to change here. Quick look at the OSD, and I've got the RSSI value up here, craft name, warnings in the middle, and timer 2, which is the one that's activated when you hit the arm switch, and the battery voltage. And now one thing to watch on here, which caught me out, it's the first time I've seen this. I would normally set that to NTSC because I'm using 16:9 goggles and my Dominator V3s. I generally find if you use NTSC, it means the positioning of the outputs on the OSD are correct in the correct place, otherwise they can appear halfway up the screen. But if you've got this set to NTSC, when you go to look in your goggles, there's nothing. There are no OSD values. It has to be set to auto. Haven't seen that before, but you learn something even when you've been doing this for a few years. And I've set the RSSI alarm to 25, which is fine. And also notice on here that we've got, because the ESC is configured, we can show ESC temperature and ESC RPM. For the moment I won't be doing that, but I may have a look at that a bit later. But it's interesting to see that's all pre-configured for you by HGLRC in the factory. Excellent. And the version of Betaflight we're running is up here, Betaflight 3.5.5, which is a couple of points down from the very latest version, and the target is the Omnibus F4 V6. Right, so let's get some props on here and get it out and get you some flight footage. So here we go, the Maiden for the Arrow 3 on 6S, and my time using 6S, so I'm going to be a bit cautious. I've strapped a GoPro Session 5 on, and I'm using a brand new and fairly heavy 1000 mAh 6S from Tattoo. And the first thing I've noticed is the image from that Ratel camera. I didn't change any of the settings and it's fantastic. Great colours, no horrid edge ringing or pixel shimmers, but it's a very clear morning, which is perfect for this. I've no idea if it's the claimed 8 millisecond latency, but it feels very locked and immediate. I can't really explain it any better than that. Also, I can see the battery scaling does need a tweak. I'm not using 27-28 volts, so it's obviously high. But I have to say, it is totally weird seeing 25 volts on the OSD rather than the normal 14, 15, 16. I've got no idea what the VTX or receiver range of this quad is, so I'm just going to cruise around looking for some limits. And I've got no idea what the flight time is. Despite this having a largish battery and the session on the quad, it feels surprisingly nimble. There's some tweaks to be done just to cope with that extra weight, but I suspect without the session it'd be perfect and really locked in. And my normal rates seem to be okay, but I'm not going to take any chances just yet. Now, the feel of this is very different to a 4S quad. The punch outs and full throttle feels just more torquey, if that makes any sense. And the voltage drop off is much smaller than 4S. Oh, I really like this. And it's pretty fast. I was so busy looking at the voltage on the OSD, I'd covered a lot of ground, and I was trying to keep it close for this maiden flight. And I did get a bit close to those lights. Yeah, it's really quick. I'm not sure it's as quick as the Diatone R349, so I'll get that GPS module rigged up on this and check it out. Yep, I'm really liking this, and I can see why 6S is getting so popular. And I really want to try this Ratel camera at night. This car park looks great when all the lights are on, so I'll get down here again on a nice summer evening. And I am going to have to get some more 6S lipos. First impressions are really promising. It's mighty fast and the tune is rock solid, so it's truly a bind and fly. And other than setting up your transmitter and binding it, you could just go racing. The Ratel camera works great and it warrants a full review in another video. And the overall build quality of this quad is excellent and very consistent with my Batman 220. It's very neat and tidy. There's no wires dangling out and there's no scruffy horrible solder joints. And this is already on my favourite list, although the Diatone R349 HD is just as much fun and probably faster. But this is a racing machine. It's stiffer, it's stronger, and it's going to take more of a beating. You could just buy this and start racing, although you would need to add a transponder, but that's pretty straightforward. Are there any downsides? Well, nothing to report yet, but I will keep you posted. I'd have liked to have seen a couple of spare arms included with this, and maybe some more receiver options like Crossfire or R9. And this camera doesn't really have much protection. Maybe they could extend these carbon mounts out a bit to at least give a bit more protection for the camera lens from a head-on smash. Also, this battery strap is a bit of a joke really. It's way too short for a 6S battery. Even a smallish 550 milliamp is too big to get this strap around. Great thing though is spares are readily available direct from the HGLRC website, as well as other suppliers like Banggood, and that's a must these days. Price? Well, you know that changes, but it's around $210 or £165, which is pretty reasonable given the quality of component. And check out the description below for any discount coupons. Thanks for watching, and if you found that useful, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. And if it's your first visit, then please subscribe to the channel for updates. I'll see you next time.